What was the moment where you thought, oh, I think I have ADHD? For me, it was during the pandemic when the content from Catieosaurus, also known as Cate Osborn, and HeyGude, also known as Erik Gude, started to feel really familiar with my experiences too. Fast forward to getting my formal diagnosis of ADHD and autism, and I'm looking for a resource. At that time, this was only a couple of years ago, and yet I really struggled to find a book or a resource or something that felt like it was both written for a late diagnosed adult and also designed for an ADHD brain. Well, Cate and Erik have changed all that with their new book, the ADHD Field Guide for Adults. Hi, I'm Brett the Audi Boss, and yes, you can draw a mostly straight line from being inspired by the work of Cate Osborn and Erik Gude to my having created this channel and resource where we usually talk about ADHD and autism in the workplace. But today we're going to deviate a little bit from the usual topics and we're going to talk to Erik and Cate about their new book. And spoiler alert, we will be covering adult-themed topics because, well, we're adults. And this book is about adult topics in addition to all the other things you really probably didn't realize you wanted to ask or needed to know specifically covered in this book. We're going to talk in this conversation today about building systems and accommodations that actually fit our specific brain type and not just that getting a planner energy. You'll hear Cate and Erik talk about how they built this book around the questions people were asking them again and again and again. Now, when I sit down to think about the idea of writing a book about ADHD, it feels daunting and overwhelming. So I started off our conversation asking Cate and Erik about how they approached writing their new book.
Honestly, I mean, we went through several iterations of what the book might be or could be. And then ultimately we kind of started talking about like the comment section. Like we're both creators. We both make videos about ADHD and we kept getting the same comments over and over and over. And the comments would always be these really great, really generative, really juicy questions that were very much grounded in the conversations that we weren't having. And so when it came time to sort of start writing the book, we started with those questions. We started with, what if we just answered the questions that people have been asking us? And then there are some sections of the book where we expound a little bit and we expand on some of those questions. To be really honest, we also wrote this book non-traditionally. This book did not exist when we pitched it to the publisher, which is kind of non-traditional in the publishing industry. But even after that, once we were fortunate enough to get the book deal and they were like, yes, we will publish it, we started working with a collaborative writer whose name was Rennie Dyball. And Rennie is fabulous. She's an incredible person, really helped make the book what it is. But what's really interesting is that as two authors with ADHD writing a book about ADHD, we needed accessibility options.
Yeah.
We needed accessibility in the process. And so Rennie was one of the like I don't want to call her a tool because that's so terrible. But like she was an accessibility tool, having a collaborative writer to guide us through the process and like create checkpoints and guidelines and kind of like, hey guys, like you really need to get this chapter in. We would not have it if it were not for the supports and accommodations that we received on the book's journey. And so we kind of just wanted to reflect that accessibility and that intentionality back to the community. And so that's why the book is the way that it is.
There's so many times when so many of us feel like we can't do something or we hit a wall or a barrier that we can't do, but there are always ways, and that's sort of the theme of the book. There is always a way if we just sort of make the accommodation for what our specific brain needs. You can write that book if you just have the right accommodation.
Just because we have those accommodations, it was such a nice like microcosm of what accommodations can do. As we had Rennie helping us just tremendously, we got to focus on each individual question and just writing and answering the questions rather than doing what our brains are really bad at doing, which is organizing big picture. How do we organize all this information, So it had really allowed us to sort of run with the book.
Well, and just a call out to that too. You have a great chapter on accommodations. I mean, the section specifically, you've got the lists and just how to apply those different things. I mean, I just found that to be so, again, accessible and just an easy way to sort of turn to a chapter, go, oh my God, I need an accommodation. Where do I begin? It's right there on the page and I can kind of go through and figure something out. That was really helpful.
I don't know, like one of the challenges that we have is that Erik and I have very different experiences around our ADHD. Like Erik was diagnosed young. I was not. Like Erik struggled in school. All my self-worth is wrapped up in being good at school. We have very like disparate experiences. And so we found very quickly that like what works for Erik as an accommodation doesn't work for me, and what works for me doesn't necessarily work for him. And so rather than just making a book where it's like, have you considered getting a planner? We really wanted to make it a book about how to discover your own needs and build support systems and support structures that work for you, because you are the person who knows yourself the best.
Yeah.
And so like the big, it's funny, you're the second person who's been like, I really like the accommodation list.
Yeah.
But the accommodation list, like that came out of it. And it is purposefully kind of just like random and disorganized and that kind of thing, because it was like, how do you disorganize it? How do you organize it? How do you talk about any of this? And so, yeah, so a lot of that was born out of just the knowledge that everybody's experience with ADHD is different. And so it felt disingenuous to be like, there is one correct way of doing ADHD.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the book is about just that, is discovering how to create systems and structures that work for you.
I want to come back to that point in just a second, but I kind of want to go over here for a second where you write about how what this specific book is doing is it's covering topics that you felt you're not going to read somewhere else, but were critically needed. What were the topics you felt as you were going through it that were so critically needed?
Oh, man. I know mine immediately, but I'm so biased. I'm like, this sex chapter, like,
Yeah,
I'm going
to get to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the BIPOC representation and non-cis in general representation staggeringly is absent in the conversation. So that was just absolutely from the very beginning, that had to be there. But I think I read about in the sex chapter, I think that's where it ended up, but how it can affect the male libido as well. It's not a very often talked about thing. A lot of ADHD folks who have been in my comment section or email have mentioned, like, as a male having sex and doing sexual stuff, ADHD can get in the way in a lot of, in various ways, some of which are directly obviously related to ADHD and some things are more residual. But it looks like that conversation really wasn't being had. So I really wanted to include a very vulnerable section just about what it's like to be a man, a sexual man with ADHD, and all the things that can lead to: disappointment, frustration. I really wanted to start that conversation.
And I love the conversation you're starting in that chapter. Cate, I know you reference regularly, you are a certified sex educator. Both write in the book that over 40% of people with ADHD struggle with sex in one way or another. What can we be doing to have more generative conversations in our relationships on this? Because it is daunting and it feels like a hard place to sort of start. Where do we start?
Right now, we're in a really interesting moment in the conversation around ADHD. Like, obviously, Erik and I got our start during the pandemic. And what was unique about that was that we kind of entered the conversation in a time where a lot of people's structures and systems were breaking down because all of a sudden everybody was trapped in their home. And so there was this huge rise in the sudden influx in diagnoses of ADHD. And so for a lot of people, they were navigating through just that part of it of, what do you mean I've had ADHD the whole time? What do you mean that it's been this? And what do you mean that I'm not broken, that I'm not weird, that I'm not the only person struggling with these things? And that was a really incredible experience, being part of so many people's journeys. But then now we're 5 years on, and a lot of the same people are now in a place where we're entering conversations around explanation versus excuses. We're entering conversations around, well, I am neurodivergent and I tend to interrupt people, for example. And is it my right to interrupt people? And if not, how do I mitigate it? A lot of the book is about that, is about the, once you know, it is important to be able to develop accountability and to develop a sense of personal responsibility that does not, make excuses for or, like apologize for your neurodivergence. Well, so recognizing that you're going to struggle, but you always say it better than me. I feel like I had it and then I completely finish the thought. Sure.
The conversation regarding ADHD, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, before 5 or 6 years ago, before then, so before 5 or 6 years ago.
So 10 years, mathematically.
ADHD was sort of a difficult thing to talk about. There was a lot of denialism about it. It was very hard to tell who would be receptive to it and who would scoff because they had a nephew who had, everybody has some sort of personal experience
Mhm.
ADHD of somebody in their lives. So everybody had different reactions to it, and it was hard to tell who you could talk to about it. Then as TikTok sort of became more of a thing, the pandemic happened, suddenly people are alone in their house. A bunch of people realized that their ADHD isn't just something that occurs in some external context at work or at school. It's something that affects every moment of their lives. And they have nothing else to do because it's a
Yeah. Yeah.
So they went online and either consumed or made content about ADHD. And that has sort of opened the window of, oh, there's a lot of people talking about this, which is great. And I think that initial influx of talking about, of being able to talk about this openly without worrying that someone's going to, jump at you for it, that swung this pendulum way towards the direction of acceptance.
Mhm.
It is okay with ADHD. You are okay. You are not broken. All of which is absolutely true. But I also see some people in response to that pendulum swinging have swung in the opposite direction. You're just trying to get rid of your accountability. You're trying to act as if the things that you do wrong, quote unquote, because of your ADHD
Yeah.
are not your fault and you should be excused for it. And I think there's a balance to be struck there in a non-cynical way. I think either of those takes in a cynical way is no way to. But ultimately, I think there's a balance between those two things, between acknowledging that the fact that you have ADHD and you are prone to struggling with certain things is absolutely not your fault at all, any more than your height is your fault. It's just how you were born. But your behavior is your responsibility.
Mhm.
And although the fact that you struggle to not interrupt people or to remember appointments doesn't excuse you from doing so. Pivotal in the book, I think we were trying to walk that line down the center of acknowledging that struggling with these things is not your fault, but your response to it is. The analogy I always think of is, it's not your fault when it snows, but you still have to shovel your driveway.
Yeah. Yeah.
You still got to
That
do
is a great analogy.
I think we try to strike that balance in the book, and I think we did a decent job.
I think you do, because throughout the book, there is this theme that feels like just that point that you keep kind of returning to, is either from feedback you got from the community or as you write to it from your own perspectives about, I feel bad about myself. Why don't I have the superpower ADHD? Or is it okay if I feel bad that I hate my ADHD? And just this sort of self-generated, like, Erik, you have this heartbreaking story where you come away feeling evil after a particular relationship ends. And I found that just so relatable, how we get lost within those feelings within ourselves, just about how do we work to reduce that sort of negative feeling within ourselves, just to not feel so terrible because this is just a neurological thing that we have.
Yeah. I mean, and those moments, the one in particular was about an ex-girlfriend of mine. Those feelings are insidious. They're very subtle. They don't jump right out at you. They're just sort of almost like a canvas that more blatant feelings fall on top of. It's almost as if our bodies were like a vehicle that our minds were born into, and they all have a brain, and we have to use that brain to operate our bodies to behave in some way. If you were to give me a car that I didn't know how to drive, I might hit someone. I might do some damage with that car because I don't know how to drive it. And so I think just fearlessly exploring yourself, learning what you're good at, learning what you're not good at, and most importantly, learning what you can and can't change. The fact that your brain is wired this way and you have executive dysfunction, it's very unlikely that you will be able to straight up change your brain wiring pending huge medical breakthrough or something.
Yeah.
But you can change how you respond to it in a practiced, measured, and deliberate way. And so I think that journey is the journey that sort of answers all, is explore yourself, learn yourself, be absolutely honest with yourself about who you are and who you believe yourself to be, and then learn to drive your car,
Yeah. Yeah.
And every so often, clean the trash out of the cup holder.
Yes. Kate, something I wanted to ask you is, when we have friction in our relationships, be it a partner who doesn't have ADHD and one that does, or as you guys noted, partners who have separate kinds of ADHD, which is, I think, pretty common as well. How do we balance that friction with intimacy when we kind of, those two walls hit each other?
Oh gosh. I mean, there's so many different ways where there can be friction around intimacy. I mean, the first thing that I always like to tell people, and this just blows minds in and of itself, is that there are different types of intimacy outside of sexual intimacy. And so for some people, they have incredible emotional intimacy and relational intimacy, but they might struggle sexually. There are some people who have incredible sexual intimacy, but they struggle with the emotional component or the shared experiences component. So the first thing that I always like to talk about is figure out where the wanting is. Do you want more emotional connection? Do you want more intimate moments? Do you want more physical touch? Do you want the actual act of having sex? But because all of those things are different. And then once you are able to kind of name the wanting, name where the mismatch is, you can get a little curious. You can get a little bit more purposeful around, all right, if we are missing that emotional component, maybe we start having more purposeful conversations. Maybe we build an evening where we aren't on our phones and watching TV at the same time, and we are just going to talk about an article that we agreed to read together. You can do it a million different ways because, again, what works for you might not work for me.
Yeah.
But it's the idea of like intimacy is such a big and broad and vast thing, and it can kind of feel like eating the elephant. Like how do I do this? But once you can sort of narrow in on what do I actually feel like I'm missing? Where's the actual friction happening? Then that gives you the permission to really start delving into the nitty gritty and the smaller things. And sometimes the conversation can just simply be expository, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, I get so frustrated when you react this way or when you do this thing. And sometimes it just comes from a place of going, oh, well, I do this thing because my executive functioning works in so much as that I never remember sex exists until I really, really want it. And then I come to you and then you feel a bunch of pressure to like respond immediately. And that doesn't work for either of us.
Yeah.
So now we can have another conversation. So I don't know. I always feel really silly because at the end of the day, I think if you boil down the work that I have dedicated my life to doing, like 99% of it is, have you considered having a conversation about it? But it's how you have the conversation and when you have the conversation, and even as like a neurodivergent person or with a neurodivergent partner, how you have those conversations.
Yeah.
The style of like there's so much just in the choice to have the conversation. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's...
It does, though, because, I mean, that was sort of the big takeaway I felt from the chapter on sex and intimacy, which is essentially that, we put all this weight into sex when at the end of the day, we need to just have a conversation in order to sort of get through the struggles that we're having.
Yeah, like it is very, very rare that simply saying, okay, we will have more sex will actually fix you. Because oftentimes it's just a feeling of loneliness or emptiness or just wanting more of a connection.
Yeah.
The connection, and just figuring out what you need out of that connection.
One of the things that I love about the book is how you go about debunking a lot of myths and misinformation. One of the ones that I think you lead off with this one is that we don't grow out of ADHD. What other kind of myths and misinformation were you eager to address with this?
I feel like sorry, I interrupted. You were going to go.
My immediate, please do go, but my immediate thought was just red dye number 40.
Yeah.
There was a whole thing to listeners who might not know. There was a whole thing maybe 2 or 3 years ago where there was a very loud group of people, particularly on TikTok, who were very convinced that red dye number 40, which is a food dye, has been what's causing the rise in ADHD diagnosis, which is just so unbelievably not true. But it was weird to have to waste time talking. I mean, not waste time. It's a myth that's out there.
Yeah.
Spelling. But like, come on. If you're going to be a grifter, are you messing with the neurodivergent people?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I think that was one of the things is like we debunk a lot of common myths and misconceptions, but I don't know, like I really struggled with some of those sections, like especially writing, because I never wanted to make people feel like they were silly or foolish for believing incorrect information, because like you cannot control the information that you get.
Yeah.
And I think that there's so many people who have grown up feeling broken and strange and alone. And so it makes sense that they would seek answers, and it makes sense that they would seek them from seemingly reputable sources.
Yeah.
And so like, for example, like the Almond Clinic is like a really big one in terms of like, it has been debunked, and there are lots of conversations about like how kind of damaging that messaging is, but it still is a prevalent conversation in ADHD because like SEO analytics make it come up frequently.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so, it was really interesting kind of just really looking at all of those and really realizing that if we were going to talk about ADHD, we're also going to have to talk about untruths around ADHD.
Yeah. I'm going to keep gushing about the book because I love it. So, one of the things I love about it is when I first open it up, it says, it's on the title, it's Field Guide for Adults. It very much feels like a book for adults. If people didn't pick up on that from the nature of our conversation so far, why does ADHD feel like it gets harder for us the older we get?
Yeah, I think the most immediate answer is just our lives get more developed. There are more things, more people in it, more bills to pay, more phone calls to make, more emails to send. There's just more. There's more stuff going on. Then there's also a more mechanical reason, which is just our bodies age. That's what happens. Our body is ultimately one big chemical, mechanical system with hinges and pulleys and weird stuff. And as it goes on, it starts to age. It starts to wear down. And that's just the case with our brains as well. There's the link between aging and ADHD getting worse is not super crazy proven. There's a couple studies on it. But if you just think about it, if you're already forgetful or something like that, or name an ADHD symptom when you're 22, it's unlikely that your brain being, 50 years older is going to make it better. I mean, you might be better at it in a more practical way because you've had it for longer and you know yourself better and all that. But behind the scenes, ultimately, your brain is an older model. What happens.
You're right.
Sure,
I'm just like the car metaphor.
The car.
Erik, you're bringing all the great metaphors today. This is great.
And I don't know. And again, like not to just keep making it about the stuff that I'm interested in, but also, I mean, if I had just an hour to rant about the complete lack of research around ADHD and menopause, it has been within the past 5 years that we've really started actually studying it.
Yeah.
And so there is a lot coming out about the vastly different experience of, menopausal women and ADHD and how much like hormonal changes in the body can impact the effect and impact of ADHD on your life. And so, like Erik said, like our bodies change, we get older and there's more challenges. Like also there's a really high rate of like chronic pain and other sort of like issues in the ADHD population. And so when you are dealing with chronic pain or your body is aging and you hurt more, that is also a tax on your cognitive function and your executive functioning. You're managing more doctor's appointments, you're managing the scans or like whatever. And so it just compounds. It just compounds and compounds and compounds and compounds. And so like, of course, you feel differently about your ADHD at 20 that you do at 60. Like,
yeah. That was literally going to be my next question. Premenopause and menopause, because no one else is really covering that as much. I don't think, when I read it in the book, I felt, thank God someone's talking about it because, it's only just now I'm only just now starting to see more of it talked about on TikTok and Instagram and things. So it's great that you're addressing it in such a helpful way, in particularly.
Yeah, we're really proud of that. Like we did have to kind of fight a little bit for like a lot of that content to be included, mostly just because it was like, oh, well, doesn't this exist elsewhere? And we were like, no, it actually doesn't. But also, I don't know, this is just me seeding the pot a little bit. But one of the reasons why I really want this book to do well is because I'm already working on book 2. My PhD, which is going to be, and I want it just to be about sex and intimacy and menopause and like all of the stuff that we don't have conversations about.
Yeah.
So like selfishly, I'm like, please buy the book so I can write that book. Thank you.
Yeah. No, that is, I was going to say that too, that is the book I think we definitely need is like the accommodations book for sex and relationships. Like if you can merge those two worlds through your PhD, that would be amazing as another.
There's so many interesting accommodations you can work out. I love it. I love talking about it. It makes me so happy. So if you ever want to do another episode, I'll come back.
Yes, please. God, yes, of course. One of the things I want to kind of cover as well is I love the section on systems and just acknowledging they fail. They're not every system works for every brain, and they're not for all the time. I can't remember which one of you wrote they're not for all the time, but could you talk a little bit more about system sustainability?
That's you.
Yay,
That's you, bud.
Sure. Well, first off, the reason we talked so much about systems in the book is because it seems like a lot of content, whether it's written content or short form, long form video content, there's sort of lists of techniques Try doing this, try doing this, try doing this, try doing this, which is great. I'm not knocking that. Like it's very useful. But ultimately, the tool is only useful if you know what problem you're trying to solve with it. If you give me a hammer and say, hey, use this, like I have nothing to hammer. I don't know. So we try to focus on the more general idea of a system, which we define in the book, dear listener, if you anything that makes your life easier. We call them systems, even small little things, to try to endow them with the deserved importance, because all of them are techniques for more happily living as ourselves. So we tried to zoom out and refer to systems as generally as we possibly could, rather than give people a bunch of examples. I mean, we do give examples, and we wanted to give people a toolkit such to look at a given problem, ADHD-related problem that they're having, and then start to piece something together and expect it to not work perfectly, because it's not.
Yeah.
That's the first draft. That's the rough draft. So you try a solution. Let's say like pants, for example. Pants are a big part of my life. If I have my pants stuff in order, I'm generally doing pretty well. Pants are all over the place, I'm probably not doing so hot. So first it was like, okay, I don't need to wash these pants immediately, so I'm not going to put them in the hamper. So I'll fold them and put them back on the shelf. I hate folding, so I would never do that, and they would end up back on the floor. And so after iteration, I ended up with the pants hook, which is, I move around a lot from apartment to apartment, and I always have a pants hook, usually over the door, so that I can pop those bad boys on there at the end of the day, and they don't get cluttered up with all the other stuff. Took a surprising amount of time to get there. But that process was all about starting something, just getting a solution in place, seeing what works and what doesn't work about it, and then tweaking it from there until eventually you end up with a system that works. And I find what's interesting is a lot of times our default behavior, taking your pants off and throwing them on the floor or something like that, is not really far off, behaviorally speaking, from a really good system that would work.
Yeah.
I had another problem at the old apartment I had where I would always throw my jacket on the floor in the same spot. I would go like this. The motion was I could off into my right hand and then toss this way. And so I put a hook right there, right where my hand would be. So now it's the same motion. It's the same thing, but it's a hook.
Yeah.
There you go. Now you have a system. So we identify a couple ways of tweaking your system, things to look out for, properties that systems have, might need tweaking to make it better for you. But it was meant to be more of a method than just a list of solutions.
We can tell you that the book is available as a regular book. It is available as an audiobook that Erik and I both recorded. It is also available as an EPUB if you like to read on your screens. If I can shill independently for myself for a second, I'm also going on tour for the first time. I'm going to be touring for the rest of 2026 with a new show that I wrote called Wildly Unprepared. And so if you want to check out the book, if you want to check out my tour, you can go to Catieosaurus.com if you want, but I sure would like it. Please do that.
Be patient with yourself, dear listener. Just be very patient with yourself. A lot of this takes a lot of time, and it's frustrating, and there's no real roadmap for it. But try to be patient with yourself. Try not to have ire for yourself as you become a student of your behavior and watch what you do. Just be kind to yourself. I think that's one of the most important ingredients in all of this, is to have compassion for yourself.
My extra special thanks to Cate and Erik for their time today. I'm so excited about this book. I'm excited that I got the opportunity to talk to two people who have really influenced me and helped me learn a lot about ADHD and apply that to my everyday life and my work life and everything. So I love this book. It's definitely worth your time. And as Cate mentioned, there is an audiobook, there's an ebook, there's an amazing print book. And I want to just I have the book a little backwards for the filming, but I want to just show off a little bit of how well designed it is for ADHD brains and how it really is in a style that is going to help your brain as you go through this book. So do check out how to pre-order it or order it depending on the time that you're seeing this video. And as Cate also mentioned, getting orders in for their book is a powerful message to the publishers, because it's the equivalent of liking and subscribing a YouTube video. When the pre-orders come in and when really all orders go in for a book or an audiobook or an ebook, it helps send a signal that the marketplace needs more of that out in the world, and it helps publishers understand that. And I know I, for one, very much want to see Cate's second book that she talked about in our conversation today. All the links in the description below. You know what to do. Go check that out. And of course, if you did like this conversation, I would love it if you could like and subscribe to this channel as well, because as noted, it does really help the channel and our content and the educational work that we do here grow and reach more people who can benefit from it. Let me know if you have a topic that you'd like for me to cover here on the channel. And as always, thanks for watching and listening. Be sure to check out some of the other videos while you're here, or some of the other episodes if you're listening on the podcast. Let me know in the comments what resonated with you. I'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks for watching.